Good afternoon, everyone. Just going to wait a few more seconds while the rest of our attendees finish filing in from the waiting room into the webinar. Okay, it looks like folks are all joined up. Thanks for joining us. And hi, my name is Greg. I'm a consultant with CERC in Connecticut. Just wanted to take a moment before we get started here to let you know how the webinar works. At this point, we're probably all very familiar with a Zoom meeting and how that works, but this is a Zoom webinar, so it's just a little bit different. You'll notice that as a participant that you don't have the ability to unmute your microphone or to share your video, but you do have a couple of functions that will allow you to interact with us during the course of the webinar. The first being the chat panel, which you should be familiar with if you've been on one of these before. You can type chat messages that everyone can read, or you can address them directly to our panelists. The second one is the Q&A button, and notice that it looks similar to the chat panel, but it's separate. Use the Q&A panel if you have a question that you want the panelists, the presenters, to address. Those questions will be added to a queue, and at a couple of intervals throughout the presentation, we'll be addressing them. Please don't put questions in the chat panel because they probably won't be seen by our presenters. And then finally, there's the raise hand feature. Towards the end of the presentation, we'll have an opportunity for participants to address the panel. And at that point, you will click the raise hand button if you wanted to speak to the panel. You'll be placed in a queue, and when it's your turn, you'll be unmuted and be given the ability to speak to the panel. So with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Andrea from the State Department.
Everyone, I'm Andrea Brunel. I work for the Connecticut State Department of Education. My role is the 619 Part B manager, which means I have responsibility for preschool special education. And I also have some general education responsibility with regard to early childhood. We really appreciate all of you taking the time out of your hectic schedules during this health emergency. We know that everybody is extremely busy and you have a lot of stressors in your life. So we do really, really sincerely appreciate you taking the time to learn with us today. I am so excited that today we have colleagues from Rhode Island here to talk about their experiences with itinerant early childhood services. Keep in mind that when we say itinerant in Connecticut, we're usually talking about a parent bringing their child in a couple days a week, for example, for speech. We're not talking about that on this webinar today. This webinar today is really about school districts sending special education services into community-based programs, those kinds of itinerant services. So without further ado, I want to introduce my counterpart in Rhode Island, Ruth Gallucci, and she'll tell you a little bit more about what you're going to do today, and she will make introductions for her Rhode Island staff.
Well, thank you, Andrea. It's certainly a pleasure to be here with you today. I am, as Andrea mentioned, Ruth Gallucci, and I sit in the same role as Andrea does in Connecticut. And I am here today with my colleagues from one of our school districts, Woonsocket's Education Department, and some community-based partners from Head Start and Community Care. And we look forward to meeting you. So let's just pull up my PowerPoint and we will introduce ourselves. Hi. So Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Gagin and I provide technical assistance for the itinerant model.
Dawn? Dawn, you're on mute?
Nope, I unmuted. My name is Dawn Perrell. I'm the Assistant Special Ed Director in Woonsocket.
Hi, everyone. Beth Campanelli. Oh, I'm sorry, Sue. I just skipped you.
Go ahead, Beth.
Thank you, Sue. My name is Beth Campanelli. I am the Department Chairperson for Speech and Language in Woonsocket.
Good afternoon. I'm Sue DeRiso. I'm the Director of Literacy and Title I for the Woonsocket Education Department.
Hi, I'm Melissa Custer. I'm the Early Childhood Special Ed Coordinator for Woonsocket.
Did Melissa Moniz arrive? So our principal, who we intended to join us today, I'm unsure if she was able to make it. So if she does get in on time, I know she was in the school passing out Chromebooks this morning. So hopefully she can join us. Mary.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Varr, Executive Director at Woonsocket Head Start, and we provide a Head Start program, state pre-K programs, and infant, toddler, and preschool childcare.
Thank you. And then Kate, do you want to introduce yourself?
She might not be here.
Okay. Jody, are you on?
They might not be able to do it, Ruth. I don't know if they are able to unmute.
Okay. Okay. Well, we have several other key players on the call as well that aren't participating, but are here to provide support. And if there are any relevant questions, they would certainly be able to answer those. So thank you for joining us. So this is what we wanted to do today. As Andrea mentioned, this is going to be really quick. We want to give you a very brief overview of what we're talking about when we talk about the Rhode Island Itinerant Early Childhood Special Education Service Delivery Model. We're then going to give you an equally brief update of how we're using this itinerant model at this time during COVID-19 and distance learning. We will then turn it over to our Woonsocket partners who will talk about why they chose to move into the Rhode Island itinerant model, a little bit about planning and implementation and lessons learned. At the end, we do have about 15 minutes set aside for general questions. And as you will see throughout the presentation, I believe we have 2 or maybe 3 times that we will pause for just a few minutes of questions relevant to the section that we have presented. So if that sounds all right, we'll jump right in. So Rhode Island's itinerant model. So Andrea did pass on some questions that all of you had. So I thought we would, before we get into the model, just give a little bit of general overview of what it looks like in Rhode Island. So the itinerant model is an evidence-based service delivery model that supports children with disabilities in general early childhood settings. It's not mandated in Rhode Island. Not every LEA participates. And it's not all or nothing. It's not that if an LEA decides to provide some itinerant services, they have flipped all of their services over to this model. It's not an all or nothing type of thing. So the itinerant model supports a main premise of IDEA that general education is the presumed first placement option for every child with a disability. And in Rhode Island, we really do echo the US DHHS DOE policy statement that came out in 2015, where they said it's the department's position that all young children with disabilities should have access to inclusive, high quality early childhood programs where they are provided with individualized and appropriate support in meeting high expectations. And that's really what it's about. It's about ensuring that our youngest learners in Rhode Island have the opportunity to participate in those inclusive, high quality settings, and that they receive the services that they require to be successful. But someone asked about a full continuum of services. Of course, it's a requirement. So if a child needs something else, then that will be provided. We do have a full continuum of services. And we'll get into a little more detail about this later. So first thing, I believe some of you might have read the Itinerant Early Childhood Special Education book by Bill McInerney and Lori Dinabell. That's where we started in Rhode Island as well. So these are general itinerant services. What are we talking about nationally when we talk about itinerant services? So again, it is based on research, and it's a way of providing special education services within that general early childhood environment. It provides an alternative to pulling children out of classrooms into either separate spaces, separate classrooms, programs, or schools. It allows the itinerant teacher and the itinerant therapist. When we say itinerant, we're talking about early childhood special education teachers or SLPs, OTs, PTs. It allows them to provide direct services embedded into the typical classroom routines and activities. So this is not the service delivery model where therapists or special ed teachers are going into programs. The program would give them a space, an alternate environment, a little room, and the services are provided and the child returns. That is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about embedding services. So a large part about this model relies on the collaboration between all the professionals and the families. So it allows the early childhood teacher to work with that itinerant teacher so that she is able to embed the instruction throughout the week. And that's really what it's all about. What is the early childhood teacher doing when the special educators leave? So think about that, because that's really where we do hang our hat. The model allows services and supports to be provided seamlessly within the child's natural environment. So we're not seeing the kind of things that we've seen before, such as children starting a Head Start program in the morning and the bus comes and they go to their special education class. Maybe the bus brings them back if there's some after school services. It allows us to go to children and work with them within the environments we want them to be successful in, as opposed to bringing children to us. And the final piece of it that we always want to articulate is that this model benefits children with all types and severities of disabilities, not just children with mild disabilities that you might have used in previous models. So the research behind this model is clear. This isn't something that we've just created. There's hundreds of years of research behind the fact that when you distribute a child's instruction throughout his everyday routines, that you're going to get a lot more bang for their buck, as opposed to when you provide massed instruction. For instance, walk-in speech services or resource services to a child once a week, 30 minutes. Good luck. We'll see you in a week, and we hope you've learned something. So this is all based on distributing the child's intentional teaching practices, distributing the child's learning throughout the week. And we know that that's effective through research. So the goal of the model is to distribute the embedded instruction throughout the week. The goal is not as much dependent on what the special educator is doing during 30 minutes of her time, but more so how she's conveying and collaborating with her early childhood partners about embedding those learning opportunities throughout the week. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So this is not a one-size-fits-all model. So it is not like every child that receives itinerant services in Rhode Island gets the same amount of direct service, that there's the same amount of collaborative meeting. It's really individualized based on each child's needs. It's also not inclusion for the sake of inclusion. So if you've been in this special ed world for a while, we always talk about inclusion as if that's the final results or the final outcome for children. This is really about children's learning and monitoring progress, ensuring that children are learning. It's not inclusion just for the sake of having a child in a classroom. There we go. It's not a resource model where you're pulling children aside, and it's not a model where you're just working with children with the most mild delays. As I mentioned, it's not inclusion for the sake of inclusion. It's based on outcomes for kids and ensuring that children are making progress. We think that it's more about that participation in the general education setting as being the first option considered for each child with a disability. So questions about a raise of service in districts, absolutely. But that said, the first option that we are looking at for children is that general education setting. So the itinerant model simply provides a vehicle for providing those necessary supports so children can meaningfully participate in those settings. So this is what it looks like in Rhode Island. We call this our anchor of practice, or our anchors of practice. When we talk about the itinerant model in Rhode Island, we are talking about all services focusing on intentional and planned instruction embedded into the classroom routine. And that's why we have this bar across the top, because it doesn't much matter what we're doing in special education if we're not able to collaborate with our early childhood partners and they're unable to embed daily activities and intentional teaching across their daily routine. So that said, there are 3 components in what we call the itinerant model. The first component is direct instruction. So every child has direct instruction on their IEP. That direct instruction is provided by either an itinerant teacher or an itinerant therapist. The most important thing about this direct instruction is that it's not designed to be the magic for the child. So that special educators coming in and providing the service and voila, the child has learned. The direct instruction is really so that the early childhood teacher and the special education teacher can learn. So they're figuring out what interventions work for that child. They're getting to know the child. They're monitoring his progress. They're modeling for the early childhood teacher. It's really about the adults learning what is going to work for the child during that direct instruction. And then the second component is the collaborative meeting. So with each child receiving itinerant services in Rhode Island, there are usually weekly, maybe bi-weekly, collaborative meetings between the itinerant teacher and the early childhood classroom teacher. And that is the time where there can be that rich conversation around planning, interventions. We can't go into a lot of detail here, unfortunately, but that collaborative meeting is really key. In Rhode Island, if we see folks saying implementing the itinerant model, but they don't have collaborative meetings with the early childhood teacher, we say you're not implementing the model. And finally, there's professional development. And that is a time where that itinerant teacher or therapist can work with groups of personnel from the early childhood program and provide training that might benefit all teachers and all staff, such as how do you use a visual schedule? What is a first then board? So instead of bringing that information to individual teachers, professional development can provide an opportunity to share information more broadly. So you can see our cycle of itinerant services. Direct DI is direct instruction, as we talked about on the last slide. CM is collaborative meetings. So each time an itinerant teacher comes in for direct instruction, she's learning something that's flowing into the collaborative meeting with the early childhood teacher where they're both learning. Again, there's more direct instruction, trying out services. The direct instruction is really to inform the discussion of embedding instruction. This is all about, as I mentioned, the embedded instruction that takes place once the special education teachers leave. The collaborative meeting is about determining what those embedded instructional activities should be. So working together as 2 professionals. This is not a consultative model where the itinerants are the experts and the early childhood teachers are learning. This is about 2 professionals, each having an expertise over their own work, working together to make decisions about children so that the intentional teaching practices can be implemented throughout the child's week in that everyday routine and schedule. So I'm sorry for running through this at this remarkable speed. However, I wanted to share a couple important forms that we use. So at these collaborative meetings, one of the first things that itinerant teachers do with their early childhood partners, and if families are able to join us with families as well, is they create a planning matrix where the early childhood teacher talks about her daily routine. Down the left-hand side, we identify target skills for the child or goals across the top, and then identify what those intentional teaching practices are that support the child in learning that target skill. You can then see that together, the 2 teachers are determining how and what and when to embed these learning opportunities. If you have questions about that after, we'd be happy to answer that. We also believe it's very important to document what happens in both the direct instruction opportunities and the collaborative meeting times, both what was learned and what the next steps are. So this is a great way for everyone to kind of be held accountable in a positive way to what they said they were going to do. The itinerant teacher said she was going to make some pictures or make a picture schedule. The early childhood teacher said she was going to try out this new teaching practice, and we were going to discuss it at the next meeting. So having some kind of documentation is really important. And finally, before we end this section, just a little bit about the rollout in Rhode Island. Rhode Island LEAs or school districts are implementing the model in different ways. So some LEAs are providing services, itinerant services in the community in general early childhood programs. Some school districts are choosing to flip, this is one of the terms that we use, flip some of their special education integrated or self-contained classrooms to general early childhood programs or classrooms. And of course, some districts are doing both, right? They're supporting kids both in the community and within their school district in general early childhood programs. And let me just mention that this model is not about supporting kids in special ed integrated classrooms. It's all about supporting kids, as I mentioned, in general early childhood programs. Again, the focus is on the importance of general early childhood for all children and supporting families and identifying high quality programs within their community that they can access. What we have sometimes in special education is two different tracks. A child gets identified for special ed, they come out of the gen ed world and they enter the special ed track. And we all know about the trajectories when children enter that separate track at a very young age. We also focus on special ed being a service, not a place. We need to shift some paradigms here and think about what special education was intended to be. That said, you know, we're very clear that no child goes without a classroom. So if there are no other options that we can support the family in finding in the community, they can't afford programs, they're not eligible for financial assistance, then the districts would provide an early childhood program for that child. And really recognizing this as a paradigm shift, both when you're communicating with families, with early intervention or other critical partners. We can't expect other folks to know where we are and what we've learned. If we've always done things one way, we really do have to open up those lines of communication and explain why we're shifting to more of an itinerant model and the benefits for their children or for their program. So I'm going to open it up to questions. Andrea, I don't know if you have any questions in the Q&A.
I'm not seeing any yet, Ruth, so we can give it a couple seconds, and if not, we can move on and save some time for the end for general questions.
That is great. I'm sure I went over as usual.
Doesn't look like anything yet.
So this was just a very quick overview on what the model is. So if there are any questions on what we're talking about with the model, this would be the time. Okay, you can certainly ask at the end as well.
There is a question in there right now.
Yep, there's, are all community preschools open to taking the special education students?
So again, this is a bit of a mind shift. So we don't think of them as special education students. We think of them as children. So I'm not sure that, so it's not like the school department should be owning the kids and then finding a place for them. Families are making choices where they would like their child to participate. I don't know programs that would say, no, your child can't come here. Now, down the road, theoretically, if we're providing great services within their program and supporting their teachers and staff, we've generally found an extremely positive, we've had extremely positive feedback from early childhood programs. Woonsocket, do you want to answer that question as well? Anybody?
I'd like to answer a little bit about that. So I think that as an early learning center, we get children in our programs all the time that may show some signs of challenging behaviors or other challenges, and the early childhood center doesn't necessarily know how to handle it the appropriate way. So having the school department come in with experts in special education services is a huge relief to the early learning center. Now, with that said, there's some centers that just may not want that. But in our community here in Woonsocket, the bulk of us have embraced this support in our programs and for our families.
Thank you, Mary. And we've certainly seen that throughout the state. There are some programs that don't quite feel ready and want some additional support, but we really haven't had programs that have said, you know, we don't want kids with disabilities in our program for the most part.
We have a few questions, but we'll take one more for now and then we'll save some for the end. So we have somebody asking if you could explain a little bit more about schools providing programs for those families who don't find their own.
So, sure. So in Rhode Island, we have many opportunities, and it is the role of the school department to support families in, number one, identifying the value in participating in high quality early childhood. So we have a focus with families when they, even before there's eligibility determinations, even when families come in for referrals, to talk about their child's participation. You know, where have your other children gone? Are you interested in having your child participate? Let me share some information on the value. So we're always encouraging our families to join. We're talking about the Head Start programs that we have in the community. We're talking about state-funded pre-K in Rhode Island and opportunities for free programming. We're also talking about our CCAP funding, which is another vehicle for supporting families with payments to early childhood programs. If all else fails and a child needs, we believe all children, you know, need a classroom, but if a child does need a classroom in the IEP, it certainly would be the district's responsibility. And we'll talk a little bit more as we go on about what Woonsocket has done to meet the needs of those children.
Okay, well, I'm sorry we're not able to get to all of your questions, but we want to make sure that our presenters have time to get through the rest of the presentation, and we'll save some of these questions for the end as well.
Excellent. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Julie.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. So I'm going to talk a little bit about itinerant services in the home during COVID-19. So during distance learning, we have to remember, you know, again, how children learn, and then also reflect and remember the research that was referred to, the distributed versus the mass instruction. So when we looked at the model, the itinerant model, we felt that this would be an effective way to support distance learning with our preschoolers, because so instead of us working with the early childhood teachers, we'll be working with the families to distribute and embed the instruction. So how do we do this? How do we do this without working with families without overwhelming them, which was a huge concern with our itinerants. So one thing is we do a single collaborative meeting. So the lead collaborative itinerant, the lead itinerant provider, rather, I'm sorry, would lead that meeting. If the family want other itinerants to be at that meeting, that's fine. But again, we don't want to overwhelm them. So it might be just the lead itinerant provider. And we're also inviting the early childhood teachers to that meeting as well. So it wouldn't be a separate meeting for the regular education teachers. Everybody would be at that one meeting. We would also provide just a single planning matrix that would, that everybody would put their input into. So that would be one planning matrix that we would be sharing with the family. So this is the anchors of practice that Ruth reviewed over, but we felt we could do all these components with distance learning. So with the direct instruction, the itinerants are modeling intentional teaching practices through really creative ways. They are doing some video chat, you know, modeling through videos. They're also kind of breaking down those intentional teaching practices into what we call implementation steps that we have in our training we can talk more about, but they're actually emailing those implementation steps to the families to help support having the practices embedded and distributed in the home. They're also doing the collaborative meetings either weekly or bi-weekly, whatever works for the family, again, not to overwhelm them, with that lead itinerant provider or more, family can handle it, more providers, and that early childhood teacher to create that planning matrix to support the embedding and distributive instruction. They're also doing the professional development. I actually had talked to an itinerant teacher from Woonsocket, and she had created a PowerPoint. Just a quick overview about the model and what the parent's role was within the distance learning, and she sent that out before she made contact with the family. So when she made that initial contact, the families were ready and understood what their role was within the distance learning, which was great. So Okay, so this is an example of a home planning matrix. This is very similar to what we do in the early child programs, but this is something for the family. So instead of the classroom schedule down the left-hand side, we have the family schedule down the left-hand side. And across the top are the goals and target skills that we work with the family, you know, depending what's the priority to them that they want to focus on. So we work on the family to create those. And then underneath that is the intentional teaching practices that we are coaching and working with the families to distribute and embed through coaching, through direct instruction, as well as collaborative meetings. And then those intentional teaching practices are embedded and distributed throughout the day and throughout the week. As you can see, there's 4 target skills on here, which some families can handle 4 target skills, but some families might be able to do 1 or 2, and that's okay. So you can build up from there as this distance learning continues on. This is an example of our documentation form. This is a really detailed example of it, but we really want to show our itinerants an example of something they're encountering now with their families. A lot of families are stressed, they're overwhelmed, they're dealing with increased behaviors. So this is really a detailed example of how this itinerant or itinerant team handled this situation. And it really gave a nice summary of what happened during the visit and what the next steps are going to be for direct instruction and for the collaborative meeting time. So this is really detailed. Usually we don't have our itinerants put so much detail on, usually it's just bullets, but we really want to show a good example for our itinerants so they could see what occurred.
Thank you, Julie. And if folks want, we can send these examples in an email after the presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Julie. All right, so we're going to turn it over to the Woonsocket Education Department to talk about why they chose the itinerant model. And again, at the end, if you have any questions for Julie or any of the presenters, we're more than happy to answer those questions at the end. So, Dawn, is this you?
Yep, that's me. Can you hear me?
You're a little soft. It's
Alright.
fine.
Okay. So Woonsocket decided to jump on board and participate in the itinerant model for many different reasons. One being that we felt that our students needed to be included more. In following IDEA and the regs and the inclusion policies and whatnot, we felt that our students needed more opportunities to be with their peers. A little bit of background on Woonsocket. We had 8 classrooms, pre-K classrooms, 4 a.m. sessions and 4 p.m. sessions that were all primarily self-contained sessions. So with that said, we kind of felt that once students went through the early childhood assessment and were found eligible for special education services as a 3-year-old and they needed services, we felt that at the time, the only option we had, if they were not already in a Head Start site or with Connecting with Children and Families or at the Y, we had to give them a classroom setting. And most of our classroom settings ended up being a self-contained type of setting. So within Woonsocket, special education in a way, in a sense, in the pre-K area, started to become a place. And that's something that we needed to get away from. Once students started becoming eligible for services in both resource, speech, OT, PT, they tended to need more of a classroom setting to get all of those service providers in. So we ended up needing to realize that we needed to do more inclusiveness with our students because we had the small classrooms with 12 students, all had disabilities, and they had no peer role models or they needed more. We just felt like we needed more for our students. Everyday life is not a classroom of 10 students with 2 adults with them to help them every step of the way. So we definitely wanted to do more for them. It was definitely a change, a switch that we had to work with our teachers. We definitely needed to make sure that special education was not a place any longer. It was a service being provided to help students access the curriculum. You know, we needed to take a look at adapting more for the student and helping them access the curriculum. We needed to make sure that they were in their least restrictive environment as much as possible. So when we did that, we needed to make sure that when they were in their least restrictive environment, they had peer models. Many times at the young age, students kind of learn from each other and they learn through play. So being in a classroom with students with significant disabilities and behaviors, sometimes those are the things that the students were learning with each other, were the behaviors. So we wanted to make sure that we were including the students in classrooms with same age peers, that they all didn't have disabilities, that they were able to learn from each other, and they were able to just grow with each other as well. So they were able to work together in the general ed classrooms with the pre-K model to help support that. And IDA presumes that the first placement option considers each child with a disability in a regular education classroom, and that we need to help support them, and they need to be able to adapt, and we need to help them adapt to that curriculum. For the up until now, we were the, in the state, we were the lowest LEA with students in a regular preschool setting. So like I had mentioned earlier, we had 8 preschool classrooms, 4 AM sessions and 4 PM sessions. Each session had 11 students. They were all students with significant disabilities, and they were in a self-contained setting. And that was the program that we had. We did have some students that were at Head Start and other community sites that we would go in and kind of pull our students out and work with them. So we did have both, but primarily the classroom settings that we provided were self-contained settings. So with that, we were able to flip our classrooms this year. The first year we did the itinerant model within the Head Start settings to kind of work out the kinks with the itinerant model. And from there, we were able to flip our classrooms at our Pothier Elementary. So from flipping the classrooms, we went from the lowest student ratio to the highest student ratio in the early childhood settings. So now we have 44% of our students are in a general education classroom, with the itinerant supports pushing into the classrooms and working collaboratively with the early childhood teachers. With that said, most of the students are considered low income. Our percentages were doubled at this rate. Woonsocket students had the highest rate of incarcerated parents. So these are some of our demographics of the students that we have and that we service. 48% of the Rhode Island students meet the 3rd grade reading expectations. However, 18% of Woonsocket students meet these expectations. And Woonsocket had one of the highest rate of homeless students, as well as the highest instances of neglect, abuse, youth in the state. Kind of threw a lot out there.
Thank you for all of that, Dawn. Yes, it's a whirlwind of information, but that explains, I think, nicely why Woonsocket was interested in starting to partner with the state and to look at a different type of service delivery model. So we're now going to turn it over to talking a little bit about what the planning looked like in Woonsocket and what the implementation of the service delivery model looked like. So is this you again, Dawn? I'm losing track.
It is me again. So the planning for the educational placements with the early childhood service delivery. So it helped that the state started the state-funded pre-K classrooms. So we were able to help talk to the families about getting their students involved in the state-funded pre-K. That helped us with getting many of our students in the larger classrooms with the general education teacher and students to help that inclusion piece. And it helped that we were able to foster a relationship with the local Head Start with Mary Varr and her team to support the students in the classrooms, and our special education staff and teachers that were able to go into the Head Start were able to collaborate together to plan for the students in the classrooms.
Yeah, so we really started, Dawn, back in 2017-18, right? When you mentioned that all of your children were in self-contained classrooms, and that's when we started bringing together the team to both the state folks and the director, the assistant director, Mary Varr from Head Start.
We started out in the community first to work out those collaborative meetings and work out the planning for the matrices and everything that we needed to do. And that was able to set the plate for us to flip our classrooms at Pothier Elementary School. So the following year, last year, we started the talk with the teachers about changing what their classrooms would look like from the self-contained to the itinerant models. And we only had one resource teacher going to all the communities and pushing into all the classrooms. So I want to say the teacher I had there had like 9 or 10 different sites he had to go to. We had only 2 SLPs that worked out into the community in the 10 sites and 1 OT. So if the students were already in a site and they were found eligible, we would go to them. However, it wasn't the collaborative part of it. It was, we would pull them out and work in a little group and then bring them back in. And then the following year, last year, we started planning and working very closely with Head Start and our teachers to start pushing forward for what the change would be for the following year. So the planning for the general ed classrooms, for the teachers, informing parents of what the change would look like and how much it would support their students and help them grow. We had to communicate to all the early childhoods to make sure that they understood what the model would look like as well and what our service providers coming in would look like, because it was a very big switch and change in our mindset on how we had to work together. And the change for this year is that we were able to hire more community support. We were able to continue our meetings with our staff and with the staff and the Head Starts together. Our elementary classrooms at Pothier that were our self-contained classrooms, we were able to flip those classrooms into itinerant model classrooms. Right now we have 4 classrooms, 2 a.m. and 2 p.m. And they are itinerant classrooms. We only have 1 that we weren't able to do that with because of numbers. We do have only 1 self-contained classroom. We do now have 5 itinerant resource teachers that push into all the sites. So now we have more supports for the students and the teachers to do the collaborative meetings to make sure that they're getting all the information on how to support that student every day, all day in their classrooms. So instead of having the 1 itinerant teacher going to the 10 different sites, we now have 5 teachers that are located there. We have 3 SLPs, 2 OTs, and 1 P that one physical therapist that supports all the students in the settings. So it's definitely been a paradigm shift on all of our mindsets on how we were supporting our students. And our focus now in the general education options and recruitment for next year is where we're pushing forward to, because we still have a lot of work ahead of us. This year has been great, but we still, have things to learn and to improve on.
And I think, Dawn, the focus we've been talking about before all this COVID-19 stuff happened was really thinking about how we can find additional general early childhood options for your students, right? Either within the district or partnering with new community-based programs for next year.
Yep.
Right. So we can pause a little bit and see if anyone has any questions on the implementation of the itinerant model in Woonsocket.
Just to alert people that our panelists have very graciously been able to answer some of your questions in line. And you should make sure if you're don't have that window open to see the Q&A, you might want to open it up to see some of the answers that have been posted there and some of the questions. But some of the questions that I'm seeing here are really sort of nuts and bolts implementation kind of questions. Somebody's asking if you have paraprofessionals at these sites.
Yeah, and in the classrooms that we have in Woonsocket, we have one general ed teacher and one TA, one paraprofessional for the classrooms. Yep. And as students require more assistance out into the community or in our classrooms, if they require more one-on-one support or one-on-two supports, we have been providing Head Start and or community connecting with children and families with additional supports to help them.
So I guess along with that, there are some questions about financial resources to support this kind of programming. The question is, I often hear districts say they don't have the financial resources to set up an itinerant team to implement a model like this. How does your LEA fund this model?
We were able to take the teachers that we had in-house because we had our 8 classrooms. We were able to utilize some of those teachers. So we closed 2 of the classrooms and those teachers became our resource itinerant teachers. But we were also able to, because we opened the classroom from a self-contained classroom into an integrated itinerant classroom, we were able to open up more spots for students as well.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess we'll keep going and we'll save some of these other questions for later.
Okay, lessons learned, Woonsocket. Is this you, Beth?
This is me. So I'm here just to talk about the supports provided through this model. One of the biggest supports was right there from our state. So the fact that the state can provide foundational support to get this up and running, the programming, the continued professional development. So just some of the things that were offered to our staff, one of which was an extensive 18-hour training. And this went to our special educators. So going through various modules to learn exactly what we needed to do to get the knowledge of the program down. So that was a training offered through the state. We had cycles of our special educators, and that included everybody from a teacher providing the special education modifications, speech language pathologist. We had our physical therapist, occupational therapist. We truly took a team approach into training our staff so that all knew what this model looked like and what the end goal was here. In addition to those trainings, the state also provided our general educators with training as well. I think one of the biggest takeaways from our very first year, that being last year, working within the communities, was how important it was to build a strong bond between general educators and our supports through our district. So the general educators were also getting a training. That training was less hours, but certainly gave them the highlights of what we were looking to establish with this program and how it would work, because they're a big part of this, this team. In addition to that, we have technical assistance. So Julie up there in the corner provides our technical assistance in Woonsocket. She's been a wonderful, wonderful resource, doing everything from small group meetings to individual one-on-one, monthly meetings with the early childhood staff. And I'm sure Melissa Custer can speak a lot to that because she's involved. And I like to speak about it because as the chairperson for speech and language, I'm getting a lot of questions from the SLPs about what's expected. Julie does a great job, and this technical assistant allows for that real individualized support, because this is new and it can be scary when we pull from a traditional pull-out service to this embedded, more dynamic approach to providing the services. Another thing that was great that the state provided us with is communities of practice. So getting other districts in the state who are using this program, this approach, getting them together and having them talk about the pros, the cons. You know, there's always going to be bumps in the road, but how can we work to make this better as a whole? And I think that was a really nice, nice support provided by the state. Lastly, just talking about resources and things that they provided through a Google Drive. So resources about the program, the forms that, you know, a few of which have already been shown to you, that was a really good common resource that could be accessed by our itinerant staff to learn more about it, to make sure we were streamlined and all together on this, using the same sort of resources going forward. So here are those forms. You know, I think it's a big change when we go from a consultative, because as Ruth had mentioned before, this is not a consultative model, but a collaborative model. And when I think you have structure and forms in place, such as the ones that the state has provided, it allows for the meeting to become less of a let's touch base about how this child is doing, but really goal-oriented and driven by data, looking at children's progress with priorities. What's important to the families? What's important with this general educator? How can I help to propel the progress forward? This has really helped that. I think as educators, we always say, oh yeah, no, I meet with Johnny's teacher, you know, at least weekly. This really showed that you are doing that. And now we have the data to provide it and to provide it going forward. Melissa Custer has done a beautiful job thinking about working on forms that are streamlined going year to year, so that when we're able to send this information to the next teacher going forward, people know what they're receiving and they know what information is going to be provided with these forms. It lends itself to fidelity. So one of the things that was created by the state was this fidelity checklist. And the fidelity checklist is the forms are a really great structure for the providers working together as somebody who is helping to supervise the fidelity of this program, or as administration is looking to make sure fidelity is key. This program will not work without the fidelity in place. And how do we keep everybody up to the standards that we have set through the research and the program outline? This implementation fidelity checklist helps to do that. So it speaks to the different avenues that we need to make sure that not only are the itinerant support staff using, the general educator is knowledgeable about, but it's the whole team approach to that. Ruth, are you going to open up the checklist, or we'll leave it there as a resource?
So I think, yeah, we'll leave it there as a resource. I'm just a little bit worrying about time because we have about 10 more minutes before we open it up to general questions. But thank you, Beth. So
you're welcome.
It will be there. Working with community partners. Susan, are you and Mary taking over this portion?
That's where we belong.
Right. Thank you.
So as I stated earlier, as the Director of Literacy for the public school system, I work very closely with Mary Varr, who's the Director of Woonsocket Head Start, as well as many other community partners in the pre-K world of Woonsocket. And our team met sort of coincidentally through an event that was hosted by the Department of Education. And that led us to develop many shared visions to support students, not only through the itinerant model, which became a real source of cooperative care for each other, but in many other venues. So we work together as a team. We actually call ourselves the WED heads, Woonsocket Education Department and Head Start. And we've built some wonderful transition programs for all of our community partners. We've hosted them. We've had 4 events so far. We actually had 3. The 4th was in the works when distance learning kicked in, but it's going to happen eventually to support families in transitioning from pre-K to K, to support the model that Dawn discussed in particular, and to figure out ways that we could pair with our community partners in making the support happen. So honestly, without Head Start, the program that Dawn discussed earlier and the conversion that happened at one of our elementary schools would not have been possible. And so Mary opened her school, her heart, her program to the Woonsocket Education Department and welcomed many of our students into her schools so that we could integrate classrooms like Dawn discussed and provide children with the model that she discussed that is so imperative for our youngest learners to have those great role models. But it also provided many more opportunities for children in Woonsocket to attend pre-K that did not have the opportunity to previously attend. So Mary, why don't you jump in and talk a little bit about our partnership?
Sure. So it was, it was somewhat selfish on my part to want to be in the partnership. Being a Head Start program, we are required to take the neediest of the needy, and with children with special needs, it sometimes became very challenging in our classrooms. So we wholeheartedly welcomed itinerant teachers into our classrooms to help. For my selfish part is, in a way, I look at it as coaching my teachers, and they're learning new skills that they wouldn't have normally learned working in the classroom. So, but we also have, Woonsocket is known for a lot of number ones and a lot of really not so good areas, for the highest rate of child abuse and neglect, highest rate of chronic absenteeism and things like that. And I believe with the community leaders in this city that we could make a difference and have us be number one in something that is really good and have long-term effects. We want to improve our 3rd grade reading scores. We want to improve our graduation rates down the road. And I truly believe that starts in early childhood. So it was a benefit to collaborate with the school department to go into this model and welcoming them into our buildings, into our schools, into our families' lives earlier before they get to the elementary schools. There was a question out there earlier, and I had answered, I think that we should answer it live. It was how many children, I think that in a classroom on IEPs, something like that. So we had previous years, we had, by the end of the year, we probably had in our program about maybe 30 or 40 children that we've had throughout the years on IEPs. This year, we started out at something like 72 children on IEPs. So the number of children on IEPs in our classrooms this year was just enormous. And we had, this goes to lessons learned, we had some growing pains, and we had to figure out what to do about that. And the only way that we were able to figure it out is because of our collaborative working relationship that we have. We have been in constant contact all year long with what are we going to do? How do we do this? How do we deal with that? We need more people in here. We've had some one-on-ones come in that the school department has supported. So we get through it. And it's about the relationship and having the same vision, the same goal, that we want to provide these services wherever the child is at. We don't want to bring the child to the services. We want to provide the services to the children where they're at. I think that kind of sums it up.
Thank you, Mary. It really is remarkable, the collaboration between Woonsocket and Head Start. And Mary and I know that many, many years ago, before this collaboration, the multiple challenges that we've had between the community programs and special education, and to think now about how well they work together and how it's just the way it works in Woonsocket for all children. It's pretty amazing. And they did that. They did that on their own. So huge kudos to you guys. And I think the reason that they could collaborate like that is because they believe in all children. That these are not special ed children and general ed children. These are all of our children. We're all committed to seeing them successful. So can't say enough about how hard Woonsocket has worked between the school department and the community partners. Thank you, ladies. So we're gonna skip ahead a little bit here. We are actually at a point where we're supposed to be turning to questions now, I believe. So we're gonna try to finish up in 5 minutes so we still have some time for questions, if that's okay. Thank you, Susan and Mary. We're gonna shift over to, is this you, Melissa Custer?
This is me again, and I'll be speedy.
Beth, okay.
Yep, talking about district commitment. I mean, it says it all there. The leadership, the support to the providers that are giving that day in and day out is what needed to happen, and it certainly did. It's a big mindset shift, and in order for that to happen, they need the support. So we are moving forward. We're committed to this. We are not only focusing in on this in the preschool, we're looking preschool onwards. So we're looking at our preschool folks to be the pioneers for what we should look at as far as embedded services go. We have started to sprinkle this into the kindergarten. I should say it's more than a sprinkle. We're really trying to shovel it in. We want people looking at what it's like to provide these services within the classroom to support them in their access to learning rather than our traditional pullout. That's been huge. Admin has been wonderful. We've looked at increased staffing. And not only that, is really watching caseloads. I think that's a big change as far as speech and language goes. We understand what they would need in order for this to work, and we've supported that. That is a big piece of this. Caseload of those special educators, caseload of speech and language. That's a huge part of it. Another, what I'm looking at right here too is all of the pieces that the state supports, we need to support the staff to be able to go to those. So what we're talking about is that release time, knowing that the training is so important for the people to then get the basis of what this programming is. And we've been able to establish that so that they're able to meet with these community of practice, to attend the training. You need that foundation to move forward.
Beth, are you continuing with this slide as well?
Is this me too? Yep, last one. So all children are in the our general education students. We've said this throughout the presentation. We're providing their supplemental supports, accommodations where they are at. Mary has said it, Dawn has said it. We're really meeting them where they are at and supporting that. Children start in the classroom. It's not the reverse. It's not starting in their home-based self-contained room and then being integrated into a regular education program. They are part of that community, and they don't need to be ready to be included. They are part of that classroom family, and that's where they start. The embedded service delivery I just talked about, making it meaningful, making it effective for them to approach learning in the way in which they can do it. And we're the ones personalizing that education to them. And the collaboration between that gen ed and the special educators is really priceless. I think Mary spoke to it quite importantly, that without that culture of working together as a team, this design will not work, and we've worked very hard for that. So just the culture behind the program is one that you really need to support.
Thank you, Beth.
You're welcome.
Melissa, you're on mute. Can't hear you.
You hear me now?
Yep, you're good to go.
I'm not sure what happened. My headphones must have been bad, so I unplugged them. If you hear a child in the background, I apologize. So there has to be some sort of leadership and accountability for the staff that are doing this. There has to be somebody that's able to oversee that the staff is leading the planning matrix, the documentation forms, that the collaborative meetings are happening, that they are working to their schedule. The schedule that the teachers put together can be very fluid, and it can be changed over time as more students may become eligible for services within one of the community-based sites. You have to make sure that this is done with fidelity, otherwise it's not going to work. If one person is working their butt off in doing what they're supposed to be, but the other people that are working with them on the team are not, it's going to be very difficult. There are forms that are available that can help track behaviors, that can work with students that may not necessarily have IEPs or be identified as having services, and that's part of what we do within the classrooms with the teachers and the staff that are working there, is to help identify that. So on services in the regular education, early childhood education, in 2017, we were at 15% of students that were in a regular early childhood education program. And now in 2019, we were up to 51%. I would like to think that if you saw our 2020 data, it would be a lot higher because of having the itinerant model and not having students, as many students in a self-contained classroom.
Let me say, Melissa, that I have never, ever seen this much progress in 2 years in my time in the state. So yes, I agree it's going to go up, but Andrea, this is significant.
And then services in a separate special education settings. So we went from 44% of our students getting services in a self-contained or separate special education classroom down to 13% in 2019. And again, this will be lower for 2020 as we have reduced again our amount of separate classrooms for students with services.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for that overview. So we're not doing too badly, Andrea. We are at the portion of the presentation where we can take general questions, either by raising your hand, the little raise your hand feature at the bottom, or putting your questions into the Q&A.
So while we're seeing if anybody would like to ask their question live out loud, there are a couple in the Q&A that relate to caseloads, both for teachers and for speech and language pathologists, if you have any guidance about caseloads.
So what we're saying from the state, so there are no requirements, it's not regulatory, this is guidance. So what we're saying is about the same number of students that a special education integrated classroom teacher would have. So typically in Rhode Island, you would have no more than 7 kids with disabilities in your integrated classroom. So 7 children in the morning, 7 children in the afternoon. Where we've landed for the itinerant model is about 14 children on your caseload, maybe up to 20. Again, it really does depend on the children that you're supporting and how much support you need, but somewhere in there seems to be the correct answer. And then for speech, our guidance is no more than 30 to 35. And honestly, Woonsocket has done a tremendous job trying to stay within those guidelines. If you have 50, 70 kids, there's no way an SLP can provide this type of service. It just doesn't make any sense. So.
Great. So Greg, I would ask you if there's anybody that you need to unmute, to feel free and do that. I'll proceed with what's written in the Q&A, and you can just sort of interrupt me. So you have been talking about general ed and integrated preschool programs. We have a question here about what you're doing. You're calling it general ed, but can you explain the difference between what you're doing and what we consider an integrated preschool classroom?
Yeah, great question. So in Rhode Island, a special education integrated classroom is just that. It's a special ed classroom. It's designed for children with disabilities, and it includes peers, right? So it's about a 50-50 match, or no more than 7 kids with disabilities, no more than 8 children without. That's not a typical ratio that we would find in the community. Again, that's a special education placement. And they're also taught by a special education teacher that's where she might have both certificates, but she's wearing both hats. She's serving in the gen ed role and she's serving in the special education role. When we talk about a general early childhood classroom, we're talking about a regular early childhood program, whether it be in the community, Head Start, childcare, whether it be in the school department, it doesn't matter, but it's taught by a gen ed teacher. They're in Rhode Island, they're up to 18 or 20 children in the class. And that general ed teacher's job is to provide that general instruction, the general curriculum, whereas the special education teacher in this model would come in and provide itinerant services in the classroom, carrying over the special education role. So there'd be two people instead of the single teacher in the integrated special education model.
The other thing I think I'm hearing is that in Connecticut, as in many places, we can count a general ed classroom as a classroom that has at least 50% of the children that are not on IEPs. Whereas what I'm hearing from you folks in Woonsocket is you're really talking more about natural proportions rather than just meeting a compliance definition. It's being in a general ed classroom has a natural proportion, more or less, of students on IEPs. Is that a correct assumption?
So let me just jump in, and then if anyone from Woonsocket wants to jump in as well, that would be great. But in Rhode Island, we view the special education integrated classroom as a special education program. It's in our special education regs. Yes, the federal government does allow us to count it as regular ed in our indicator 6 data. We think about that as data collection. The feds allow it because there are states all across the country that are just working on getting children access to children without IEPs. And for them, that's where they're going. In Rhode Island, we have definitely made that determination that we are shooting for more natural proportions, where the special ed teacher doesn't have to wear two hats. In Rhode Island, it's the only time that a teacher would be both a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher and have to write IEPs and general ed curriculum and QRIS and all those things that really do encompass two separate roles.
Thank you. And we have another question here about fees, that if a family doesn't want to have to pay for preschool, do you always have spaces available in your state-funded programs?
So the classrooms that we have in district, we don't charge any fees for. However, if we get close to, usually in the beginning of the school year, the numbers are lower, and as time goes on, they increase. And then we get creative sometimes.
So the regulations tell us that we need to provide what a child needs. So we've gone so far in the direction of thinking of special education as a place in Rhode Island that we really needed to unpack that, right? So Dawn, kids were found eligible in the past and they immediately were taken to your special education place. Mm-hmm. So again, we've just really changed that paradigm where we're talking to families, we're working with our EI providers to say, hey, don't tell families to wait till they get to the transition table and then see what the school department gives them. Talk to their children, talk to them about where they want their children to participate, talk to them about Head Start options. So we're really trying to change the narrative. If a child can benefit from services by itinerant services, then that's what special education becomes. Big caveat, obviously, if a family cannot afford and is not eligible for any of our supports, again, those are the kids that we would look at. So that, to be honest, that's a challenge, right, Dawn? I mean, we're still working on that. We're still fine tuning that, but it's gonna take time.
And we shared with the early interventions, Dawn, myself, and the special ed director put together a kind of an overview of what the itinerant model is, what the process is to come in from early intervention or even from child outreach screenings, so that parents and families would know what was available and what is there and what type of programs the school department supports out in the community, and what we also have if a child does not meet or the family does not meet the criteria for the school community.
And
the community setting.
And then on our part, on the community provider part, we do a really, really, really heavy recruitment process where we go out in the community to find families and children that need programs. So when we work with our other pre-K partners in the city, and we work very closely with the Woonsocket Education Department, so that we are trying to get everyone possible to fill out a Head Start application, a state pre-K application, so that when there is an opening or when they become eligible for something, they will have a choice as far as to where they go. It's not perfect. We're still working on it, but it is way better than it was 3 years ago.
We've also had students that income eligible for Head Start or one of the other sites that started in one of our half-day preschool classrooms and had the option, because a spot had opened up at a Head Start, to be able to move to that Head Start longer day location where they were still going to have the itinerant model, still receiving their services, but just in the community site rather than in our school program.
Thank you. And I think it's very important also to say that Woonsocket is just very dedicated to ensuring that all children in Woonsocket, again, regardless of disability, are ready for kindergarten. So they have made decisions so that they have all kids ready for kindergarten. And again, it's not perfect, but their work, if they need more classrooms or if they need more community partners, those become their goals, because they want every child to be ready when they enter K. This is not just a special ed initiative.
Yep.
And I guess I have a question, because I know we do run into this in Connecticut. Have you run into any issues where families have chosen a childcare outside of the Woonsocket town line?
I don't know. Have you, ladies? I mean, we know the requirements that districts do not have to provide services. So, again, we encourage early intervention providers to work with families so that doesn't happen, to let the families know that if they're going to need services, they're going to want to find a childcare arrangement in their districts. But has that happened, Melissa?
Sorry, yes, we've had students that have been out at other childcare sites, and there have been times when this amount of services they needed, that we needed to move them from their childcare site that they were at to another, to one of our classrooms that we provide, or they have, if they qualified for speech and language, they may have just gotten like a walk-in service where they were coming to one of our locations to get the services.
And it looks like we're right at the end of our time. I guess this is one last nuts and bolts question to sort of frame everything, is people would like to know how many sites you actually serve.
I was just actually typing that in. There are multiple Head Start sites. I believe there's 5. Benoit Brown, Cass, KB, Borden. Am I missing one? Karen Bouchard. Oh, no. And then we do Connecting Children and Family. We also go to the YWCA. So there are 7 community sites that we are out at, and then our own school department.
Great. Well, I would like to thank all of you for taking the time to give us all this wonderful information and some great stuff for us to think about here in Connecticut. I am so especially thrilled with your strong collaborations with Head Start, and I hope that all the Connecticut programs that are listening here today know that there is much that you can leverage with a relationship with Head Start. And I would really encourage you to have those kind of conversations if you're looking for a place to start, because it sounds like that's where you guys started too, with that strong relationship with Head Start. So I'll turn it back over to Ruth to wrap everything up.
Well, just thank you so much. We have included both my email address and Dawn as the Assistant Director in Woonsocket. So if you have any specific questions, feel free to email us, or we're happy to do whatever we can. We are committed to ensuring that services for children are the absolute best they can be. So we're happy to help Connecticut in any other way that we can. So thank you, Andrea, for this opportunity.
Oh, thank all of you. I hope everybody stays well. Just know that we're going to be posting this on the State Department of Education website. It'll probably take a few days, possibly a week for it to get posted, but if you want to go back and look at any of this, it will be there for you. Sounds like Ruth and Dawn are giving you an invitation to reach out to them if you have any more questions, and certainly reach out to me if there's something I can do. And let's keep on thinking about how we can implement some of this practice into Connecticut. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
You're very welcome.